So hi everyone, let's start immediately reciting the Buddhist preliminary prayers. Hope you're well, hope you're happy. Be mindful, be aware, be conscientious right now. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami, Tatayampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Tatayampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Tatayampi Sangham saranam gacchami. Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by practicing the 6 paramitas, may I soon attain enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by practicing the 6 paramitas, may I soon attain enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the positive potential I create by practicing the 6 paramitas, may I soon attain enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May they be free from suffering and its causes. May they never be parted from their happiness beyond suffering. May they abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment to the near, and aversion from the far. I shall cause this. Great compassionate Buddha, please inspire me to be able to do so. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every types of offerings, actual and mentally transformed. I confess all of my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in all the virtues of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until cyclic existence ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for all sentient beings. I dedicate the virtues of myself and others to the great enlightenment. However innumerable all sentient beings are, I vow to save them all. However inexhaustible my delusions are, I vow to extinguish them all. However immeasurable the Dharma teachings are, I vow to master them all. However endless the Buddha's way is, I vow to follow it completely. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme. Hayata gate gate para samgate buddhi suha. Tayata gate gate para samgate buddhi suha. Tayata gate para samgate buddhi suha. So now you can rejoice in the fact that we just engaged in the preliminary prayers. And we are slowly absorbing our mind with the Dharma more and more. Of course, when the mind is absorbed with the Dharma, then the outward practice through our body and our speech is good too. virtuous, good deeds, engaging in good deeds consistently, constantly, eventually. So now let's release the tension from the body. Bring your mind inside your body. Get nice and comfortable physically. As we release the tension from the body, we're also helping ourselves to release the tension from the mind too. So from the tips of the toes all the way up to your shoulders, then down to the tips of your fingers, then back up to the top of your head. Let's take a few moments to do this now. And if you've completed it already, you can now scan the body once more to see if there's any leftover tension that you're able to release. And don't get tense trying to release the tension. Don't get stressed, don't worry, don't be anxious. Just take your time in the practice. Trust in yourself, trust in the methods, the practice, and trust in the result, even if we haven't achieved the desired result yet. Now bring your focus to your breathing, initially the tip of your nose, and follow the feeling of the breath as you breathe in your nose all the way into your lungs, and then back out your nose again. Just breathing in, breathing out. And if you'd like, you can also add the extra technique of counting the breaths. 1 in breath, 1 out breath is 1, and so on, up to 10. But if you get distracted on the way to counting to 10, then go back to 1 at that time. So if any thoughts or mental activity arises, don't cling to it. Don't grasp at it. Also, don't try to forcefully push it away or deny it, but let it go naturally by replacing the mind back onto the breath. This is the process. And also, if your mind becomes dull, then wake it up a little bit by refocusing on your breath more brightly. Don't try too hard. Don't try too little. So let's practice like this now in silence for a short while. So now we can feel really happy with ourselves for engaging in this short session. Now we will switch techniques to the loving kindness meditation. So fill yourself with universal loving kindness. You can go with just a feeling of this universal loving kindness, or you can use visualization and visualize your whole being filling with the white light or white nectar if you prefer. Feel yourself with this friendship, this honesty, acceptance, love and compassion. And now have it overflow and radiate outwards to others, initially your loved ones, your family, your friends, and fill them too with this universal loving kindness. And now also include strangers. And also those that you may find very difficult and may even regard as enemies. May all of these different types of people from your own perspective, may they have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be peaceful. Now your radiation of this universal love and kindness is gathering more and more momentum as you radiate it outwards. So now distance-wise, let's gradually radiate it out further and further, starting around your immediate area to all living beings, whether they live in the waters or on the land or fly through the air, whether they were born from wombs, from eggs, from moisture or through transformation, or whether they get to be born, or whether they're being born at this moment. Gradually further and further now radiate the love and kindness throughout your whole state or county. And other states and counties throughout your whole country. And other countries throughout the whole world, until your loving kindness pervades this whole planet, including in the waters, including all the way to the core of the earth, to the outer atmosphere. May there be happiness everywhere. May all the living beings be free from suffering, and may they be peaceful. Now include other planets throughout the whole solar system. And other solar systems throughout the galaxy. Other galaxies throughout the universe. Until your loving kindness pervades throughout infinite space. Everywhere, unlimited, immeasurable loving kindness that is generated in your own mind. And at this point, we can remind ourselves that we are interconnected, interdependent with all living beings and all of nature throughout infinite space. Just like if you have this immeasurable, you could say, net. The furthest point of the net is connected to the other furthest point of the net. And I know this idea of infinity or beginningless, endless, infinite space is difficult to fathom. But if you think about it, maybe just a little bit differently to the way you may normally think, Actually, it makes more sense. The zero and infinity make more sense than all of the measurements and numbers in between. Free from complications. So now be present here and now to recite the dedication prayer. Due to this merit, may I soon attain the enlightened state of the Buddha, so that I may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious bodhicitta, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. And may the precious view of shunyata, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. And so, of course, we continue the commentary on the Metta Sutra, the Universal Loving Kindness teachings. And we've already gone through the morality part and the meditation part. And we're up to the wisdom part, of which we've had a couple of weeks on, and we will continue today and then next week as well. And so what I just mentioned at the end of the loving kindness meditation is related to the wisdom aspect, isn't it? To the emptiness, the infinite, spacious, you could say, emptiness. And the fact that we are all interconnected when it comes down to relative phenomena, you say, ultimate phenomena, actually is beyond any expression, beyond, it's unthinkable, inexpressible wisdom gone beyond, unborn, unceasing, space-like in essence, clearly perceived by the wisdom mind itself. And we're working our way to realizing this wisdom. With this wisdom, our loving kindness becomes immeasurable, infinite. Likewise with the compassion, the empathetic joy, based on, of course, a mind of equanimity as well. Anyway, so we'll talk about this today. Last week we covered the part that says, or the week before actually, standing, walking, sitting, or lying down during all one's waking hours. And then last week we covered, may one remain mindful of this heart and this way of living that is the best in the world. And of course, from next week, we may even go on to it this week, but next week we'll finish up on this sutra, apart from, like I mentioned, maybe a whole week of just the meditation, or a whole class, I should say, of meditation, and then a conclusion as well. And so, and then move on to the next subject. So, what does it say there? It's a bit hard to sort of get into when I stopped. Oh, unattached to speculations, views, and sense desires. With clear vision, such a person will never be reborn in the cycles of suffering. And in other words, attain nirvana, attained this level of enlightenment. Maybe not a fully enlightened Buddha yet, but attained this liberation, this freedom. Okay, so so today we'll continue on to what I was talking about last week. Remember, I was grouping the different things that we can do if we are wise, and the things that we will do if we are unwise. But I'm saying it like the wise and the unwise. Or you could, like I said, be more harsh with the second word, the wise and the fools. And put another way for our own practice, when we are wise, and this is the way we should be wise as much as we can, and we should avoid being foolish. But, you know, we are fluctuating between the two sometimes, isn't it? Now, we may not be foolish in the sense of being really cruel and nasty and aggressive and violent, things like that, but also foolish when we're falling off the Dharma path, going into the old habits. That's really kind of what we're talking about there. So even though we don't like that word, do we? When I came back from living in the temple in the US, came back to Australia, I noticed a couple of words that we use in the Dharma a lot were taken by the general public as insults. But that's, of course, attachment to yourself, isn't it? That's the ego in play. Actually, no insults. They're just words expressing some things. First of all, we need to adopt be wise and so forth, and then what we need to abandon. Don't be foolish. The other word from being a fool or foolish was ignorance. And I know in Australia, even when I was younger, if somebody was, want to insult somebody, they probably would call them ignorant, but don't take it as an insult. It's actually, ignorance is really just the opposite of wisdom, isn't it? In fact, it's the translation that we use. The word vijja in Pali, vidya in Sanskrit, means to know. And the word avijja or avidya is what we translate as ignorance. And this means a lack of knowing or not knowing. Okay, so it negates that. It's the opposite. All right, so I'll continue onwards from what I was talking about last week and maybe reiterate a couple of things. So I mentioned that the wise are loving and kind. The unwise are cruel and unkind. So what we should do, we should adopt being loving and kind, and we should abandon being cruel and unkind. I thought today as well, I just remembered that because we do the preliminary prayers at the start of the class, think about what they're actually saying. So I'll utilize this same formula. The wise take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, in the teacher, the original teacher in our times, and in the teachings, and in the spiritual community that helps to, the supportive spiritual community that helps to share the teachings. Okay, so we take refuge. The wise take refuge. The unwise don't take refuge, or fool themselves thinking they are taking refuge, and really they're just going through the motions maybe. And then, of course, we pay homage. We show great respect. We generate this great respect to virtuous beings, including the Buddha, including your teachers, including bodhisattvas, even if it's only a concept at the moment. We generate this homage, we pay this homage and generate this respect and appreciation and gratitude towards them. Whereas the unwise won't do that. They are disrespectful and sometimes just putting their head in the sand, nothing really malicious or anything, but actually sometimes really quite nasty and really going and fighting against the good and being non-virtuous in a very intense way. Okay, so, but be wise, Also, the next prayer, of course, is generating the bodhicitta. So the wise work to generate the bodhicitta, this altruistic, compassionate intention to liberate all sentient beings from suffering, even though that sounds like such a big job at the moment. Do it step at a time, at our own pace. The unwise don't see this. They're actually closing the mind off even more, and when we're generating this bodhicitta, when we're wise like this, actually what we're doing is we are decreasing this attachment to ourself and this ego. We are working to uproot the ego using this method. But unfortunately, the unwise, or if the fools, would actually just be reinforcing the ego and not really caring about others. Not being considerate. There were words I used last week as well. But yeah, the wise are humble, considerate, a good influence on others to do likewise, whereas the unwise are arrogant, dumb, you could say, really selfish, stupid, and inconsiderate and harmful and a bad influence on those around them. Okay, so then if we also utilize the 6 paramitas, the wise are generous, engage in the generosity of giving material aid, engage in the generosity of giving protection from fear, and also in giving the Dharma. And whereas the unwise are not generous, and maybe even greedy, miserly. And once again, this reinforces this belief in the self. Excuse me. Then also the wise are moral and work to engage in good actions based on good attitudes. I won't go into all of these details because we've already done the 6 paramitas, haven't we, in great in-depth detail. So then, of course, in avoiding the unwholesome actions and avoiding or eradicating whenever unwholesome thoughts or attitudes arise, okay? And then, whereas the unwise don't do that, they're giving to the unwholesome so often and don't work to eradicate them and replace them with the wholesome. The wise are also patient. Whenever they are even being attacked, they are patient in their minds. Once again, that doesn't mean you don't do something about it, but it means you are in your mind, not letting your mind get blown around with even being harmed or being offended and things like that. And they're also patient when experiencing difficulties, especially on the Dharma path, and then patient when they don't understand the nature of reality yet. Whereas the unwise or fools will actually not be patient. They will act impulsively, even with fully blown anger and even aggression and violence whenever something doesn't go right for them. And also teachings such as the Dharma, if they don't agree with them, they push them away. In fact, they even try to put them down and things like that. They're kind of pushing themselves to be further away from understanding the truth and nature of reality. Then also the wise will make great effort once again to develop this bodhicitta, to maintain the wholesome state of mind, and the great effort to be enthusiastic in the practice and persevere even when we're tired. Whereas the unwise will do the opposite. They're not going to make the effort in the right direction, and their efforts probably all relate to worldly concerns in the sense of satisfying the senses, things like that. Then, of course, the wise will develop concentration and practice the meditation and work their way through all of the different jhanas, all of the different absorptions. And then, of course, the unwise will not do that. They will always be looking to be distracted because it's the habit, reinforcing again this distractedness, this attachment to being distracted. And then, of course, the wise will develop wisdom, and of course, and the unwise will not. Okay, so that's utilizing the 6 paramitas in the bodhicitta prayer. And then, of course, I mentioned it, I alluded to it before, the 4 immeasurables of universal love and kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. The wise will work to engage in these, to generate these, and eventually absorb the mind with these, and then therefore the actions will follow suit. Whereas the unwise won't do that. They will continue to reinforce the old habits of the opposites of those. This universal love and kindness, of course, is the antidote for anger, and compassion, of course, the antidote for cruelty, and so forth, and so on and so forth. Okay. What else? I think we leave it there. Apart from, I mentioned honesty. The wise will be honest to themselves. Realize if they have done something untoward and do something to change that. Do the purification practice and so forth, and to change the mind to be virtuous more than non-virtuous. Whereas the unwise, once again, will just follow their habits. Okay, so I think that'll do for that. I won't go through all of the prayers, but I just wanted, because we engage in this practice at least once a week, hopefully you do them every day. And however often you do them, at least now you can apply this teaching to it. Okay, so remember that everything I just mentioned there, if you're doing the opposite, how can you develop love and kindness? If you're being cruel, if you're giving into your anger all the time, that's not loving and kind. Firstly, to yourself, so you need to recognize that and then be loving and kind to yourself and apply the antidotes, the purification practice, and put into practice what we have been learning. There's 2 teachings that I gave you at the end of the paramita teachings, and one, first of all, is the 4 immeasurables, utilizing the 4 immeasurables and generating these to develop the bodhicitta, but also the 7-point cause and effect method as well, utilizing that where you see all living beings as your mother and so forth. Utilize these practices to purify and to train the mind in bodhicitta. And the more you do that, the more it becomes natural to do so. Okay, sometimes, like I said, sometimes you may fall backwards. It's okay. Recognize that. Be wise. Recognize that. Okay, so there's that. Then I thought I'd give a few other examples as well. Last week, I went on to mention that the wise are concerned with prevention. I use my example I use often. If you lived on the edge of a cliff, you probably would build a fence so that in your sleep, you're not going to roll off the cliff. You're not going to fall off when you're not being mindful or aware. And so this is like the prevention, preventing the mind going into these unwholesome states. This is working diligently to do that. Whereas the unwise, if they lived on the edge of the cliff, probably their bravado and their arrogance would make them think, I can deal with it. Think actually if they fall, 20 meters down, they're going to be fine anyway because they're tough guys or something. Okay, I'm just making up funny little words here, but I think you get my point. So that's just to go on about that. Then, of course, I mentioned briefly the inconvenient truth. We need to be wise and face the truth. This is both in the relative sense, what's really happening in front of you right now and around you right now, and avoid doing what the fools would do, and that is actually always just looking for the comfortable lies, the non-truths, and kidding ourselves all the time. Ultimately, of course, the ultimate wisdom is the perfection of wisdom, is the wisdom of emptiness. Okay, we don't have that right now, but we're working our way towards that. At the moment, we are still within samsara, our still, you could say, being blown off the path sometimes, to do with our previous habits, our habitual tendencies and the like, okay? But work towards the right direction. We need to work towards uprooting the ego and not reinforcing the ego. I alluded to that earlier. And maybe something like this, the wise, to do with driving, the wise would wear seatbelts, wouldn't they? Even if they didn't need to, they would wear them, not just for themselves, but also to be a good influence for those around them. And because it's the law. I think the last maybe 40 years, it's been the law, a bit more. Of course, prior to that, we didn't have that as law. And the unwise, maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't, maybe they wouldn't think of their safety or the safety of others. Also, the wise would generally, sometimes you make mistakes, but generally stick to the speed limit. And the unwise, maybe not at that time, okay? I remember some years ago when I came back to Australia, I got a lot of speeding tickets because they, for whatever, they called it revenue raising actually, whereas they were actually finding more and more people for doing something like 3 kilometers over the limit, 5 kilometers over the limit. And I got so many of them, like 3 or 4 of them, just really small fines. But I thought, you know what, I don't want to do that anymore. So I started going below the speed limit and eventually got a car that had cruise control. So very lucky, set it just below the speed limit. So the wise also will, pay attention to traffic lights, whereas the unwise may not. Also, if you're jumping out of an aeroplane, you would put a parachute on, wouldn't you? The wise would do that. The unwise probably put a parachute on. Maybe the wise would actually check the parachute and wear a backup one. Maybe the unwise wouldn't check clearly, thoroughly. Maybe not as safe. On a boat, it's a law to have a life jacket on, and the wise would wear the life jacket, even if they didn't have to, even if they're an Olympic swimmer. And they would actually wear the life jacket because it's a good influence for others as well. Whereas the unwise may actually even refuse to wear it through bravado. So driving safe as well, back to the example of driving safely and considering others as well, rather than speeding and driving erratically. This is unwise. Also related to the COVID pandemic now that we've gone through now for more than 2.5 years and continue to go through. The wise would be realistic about this pandemic, not turn the back on it or put their head in the sand, and not be even worse, denying it or fighting against it, things like that. The unwise would be fighting against it or denying it, and putting their head in the sand and the like. The wise would wear a face mask when they're in contact with others, around others, whereas the unwise would actually refuse to do so, either through, once again, putting the head in the sand or even through vindictiveness and spite. And to isolate, if you are sick or you've come in contact with somebody that's sick, then you would isolate. The wise would do that. The unwise would not do that. Distancing, the wise would distance themselves from others if they're in contact with others out in public. The unwise would not do that. The wise would keep good hygiene, not just in the pandemic time, but at all times, to look after their health and the health of others. The unwise would refuse to do that. And then, of course, limiting movement to only necessary movement as well. The wise would do that, the unwise would not. And I think that'll do for today. So next week we'll go into unattached to speculations, views and sense desires, and so on. Finish the sutra. Thank you for your patience. I hope you've enjoyed some of the examples, some of them a little bit funny, some very poignant in the modern times, and some beyond time, beyond limit. I rejoice in your goodness. I'll see you next week. I have no idea what time it is. I didn't look. So definitely under 1 minute.